They sent an unwanted mail-order bride as a punishment. But she was the cowboy's dream treasure. Clara Whitmore had never imagined her life would come to this. She had always believed that the world would be kind to those who were polite, honest, and willing to work hard. She had grown up in a quiet town in the East, surrounded by people who knew her since she was a little girl. Her parents had been gentle souls, full of love and laughter, and they had taught her the value of honesty and hard work. Clara was bright, well-mannered, and thoughtful, but life had a way of testing even the strongest hearts. When her parents passed away, Clara suddenly found herself alone. Her distant relatives took her in, not out of care, but out of obligation. They treated her like she was a burden, someone whose presence reminded them of responsibilities they had never wanted. Every day felt heavy with judgment. They criticized her for speaking her mind, for being thoughtful, and even for small mistakes that no one else would have noticed. Then, one day, a small misunderstanding at the local church sparked rumors about Clara. Gossip traveled fast in a town where everyone thought they knew everything about everyone else. People whispered about her character, unfairly painting her as stubborn, difficult, or unworthy. Clara tried to explain herself, tried to make people see the truth, but no one listened. The rumors had taken a life of their own. They grew stronger, fueled by fear, jealousy, or simple misunderstanding. She felt the weight of their eyes on her, the coldness in the words that were never meant to reach her ears but did. Her relatives, convinced that Clara was troublesome, decided that the easiest solution was to send her far away. They arranged for her to become a mail-order bride, sending her west to marry a rancher she had never met. They described her in the letters as plain, stubborn, and unsuitable, words meant to convince the other side to accept her as a formality rather than a gift. To Clara, it felt less like marriage and more like exile. She was being sent to a strange land, into the arms of a stranger, not because she had done anything wrong, but because people wanted her gone. Clara packed her belongings carefully, choosing only what was necessary for the journey. Her small suitcase contained a few changes of clothes, a worn book or two, and a simple wooden comb that had belonged to her mother. Each item reminded her of the life she was leaving behind, the familiar streets, the faces of friends, the warmth of her old home. As she closed the lid of her suitcase, she felt the first real pang of fear. The train station was busy with people rushing to and fro, but none of them were there for her. She felt invisible and exposed at the same time, a young woman standing at the edge of an unknown world. The train itself was a marvel and a mystery. Clara had ridden trains before, but never for such a long and uncertain journey. The rhythm of the wheels against the tracks was hypnotic, a steady beat that seemed to echo her own nervous heartbeat. She stared out of the window as the green fields of the east slowly slipped away, replaced by rolling hills, empty plains, and skies that stretched farther than she had ever seen. With every mile, the town that had judged her faded into memory, replaced by the unknown, the unfamiliar, and the frightening. Clara wondered what kind of man she would meet at the end of this journey. Would he be kind, or would he share the same cruel judgment that had followed her from home? Would he be patient and understanding, or would he see her only as an obligation, a mistake that someone else had forced upon him? She tried to prepare herself for disappointment, for rejection, but deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. She wanted to believe that someone could see her worth, that somewhere beyond these endless plains, someone might appreciate the courage it took to leave everything familiar behind. Meanwhile, in a small Texas town, Daniel Hayes waited at the train station. Life on a ranch could be lonely, especially for a man who had dedicated his life to hard work and responsibility. He had requested a mail-order bride through an agency, hoping to find companionship and perhaps love. But when he received the description of Clara, he hesitated. The letters called her unsuitable and difficult, warnings that would have made many men turn away. Daniel was different, though. He had known hardship all his life and had learned not to judge people based on the words of others. He believed that everyone deserved a fair chance. When Clara finally stepped off the train, the first thing Daniel noticed was her quiet dignity. She did not rush, she did not cry, and she did not falter. She carried herself with the grace of someone who had endured more than her years might suggest. Dust swirled around her boots, and the wind tugged at her simple dress, but she stood steady, unshaken. Daniel saw not a burden, not a mistake, but a young woman who had faced fear and uncertainty with courage. Their first meeting was awkward, as all first meetings tend to be, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Clara recognized the weariness in Daniel's eyes, a reflection of the long hours, the hard work, and the solitude that had shaped him. Daniel recognized the quiet strength in Clara, a resilience that had been honed by loss, judgment, and forced exile. Both of them were wary, each guarding their heart, each unsure of what the future held. As they rode back to the ranch, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a space for observation, for reflection. Clara watched the vast expanse of the Texas plains, the golden sunlight falling across endless fields, and felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. She had never seen land so open, so wild, so alive with possibilities and dangers alike. Daniel guided the wagon carefully, his eyes occasionally meeting hers with a question, a hint of curiosity, or perhaps even hope. By the time they arrived at the ranch, Clara realized that her life had truly changed. She had left behind everything familiar, and yet she had arrived at a place that held potential, a place where her courage and determination could matter. She did not yet understand the challenges she would face, the hard work that awaited her, or the ways in which she would be tested. But she knew one thing for certain: she would not let fear dictate her life. She had survived so much already, and she was determined to survive whatever came next. Daniel, on the other hand, began to see the difference between the description he had received and the woman standing in front of him. She was not difficult or stubborn in a negative way. She was thoughtful, careful, and aware. She carried herself with a dignity that few people possessed, and he felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps the letters had been wrong. Perhaps Clara Whitmore, this young woman sent as punishment, could turn out to be a blessing he had never expected. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the horizon and the sky blazed with shades of gold and crimson, Clara stood on the porch of the small ranch house, taking in the vastness of her new world. She felt small and yet capable, frightened and yet brave. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it a sense of freedom and possibility. For the first time since leaving home, she allowed herself a quiet moment of hope. The journey had been long, the uncertainty great, and the world outside her old town was intimidating. But Clara Whitmore had learned that life was often unfair, that people might judge too quickly, and that sometimes courage was the only thing that could carry a person forward. As she looked out over the endless plains, she resolved that she would not be broken by circumstance. She would not be defined by the mistakes or prejudices of others. She would take this new life, difficult as it might be, and make it her own. Little did Clara know that the man she had been sent to marry, the stranger who had awaited her with caution, would soon come to see her not as a punishment, but as someone extraordinary. Little did she know that this journey, forced upon her as a form of exile, would set the stage for a connection neither of them had expected. In the silence of that vast, open land, between the setting sun and the endless sky, the first chapter of a remarkable story was quietly unfolding. A story of courage, resilience, and the unexpected ways in which life rewards those who refuse to give up. Clara's first night in the small, simple ranch house was filled with both exhaustion and anticipation. She unpacked her belongings carefully, placing the few treasured items in a corner where they could be seen and appreciated. She hung her mother's comb on a nail in the wall and placed her books on a small wooden shelf. Each item felt like a tether to her past, a reminder of who she was and where she had come from. Yet the house also felt like a new beginning, a blank canvas upon which she could paint the next chapter of her life. Sleep did not come easily. Clara lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the creaking of the wooden beams, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the trees. Her mind wandered to what the future might hold. Would Daniel see her as a companion, a partner, or merely as someone he had been forced to accept? Could trust and understanding grow between them, or would the shadow of her past always follow her? These questions hovered in her mind, unanswered, as she finally drifted into a light, restless sleep. And so Clara Whitmore's journey began, not in the comfort of home, not in the certainty of love, but in the wide, unknown expanse of the western plains, under skies so vast that they seemed to stretch forever. She was a woman sent away as punishment, judged unfairly by those who should have loved her. Yet she carried within her a courage that no judgment could erase, a quiet strength that would soon reveal itself in ways she could never have imagined. The world had not been kind to Clara, but perhaps in this new place, with its endless horizons and untested possibilities, the world might finally start to recognize her true worth. Clara woke early the next morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the wind rustling through the tall prairie grass. The ranch felt completely different from the quiet, orderly home she had grown up in. Everything here was larger, wilder, and somehow alive in a way that both thrilled and intimidated her. She could hear the lowing of cows, the neighing of horses, and the occasional barking of a dog somewhere near the barn. Each sound reminded her that life here moved to its own rhythm, one she had yet to understand. Daniel was already up. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when she found him feeding the horses and checking the fences. His movements were efficient, practiced, and steady. Clara watched him for a moment, noting the strength in his hands, the patience in his eyes, and the quiet determination in the way he moved about the ranch. There was something admirable about the man, someone who had worked hard his entire life and carried responsibilities that would have been overwhelming for most. She felt a sudden wave of nervousness. How could she fit into this life? She had grown up in a home where her chores were simple and the pace was gentle. Here, everything seemed to demand more strength, more endurance, and more patience than she believed she could give. Still, Clara refused to give in to fear. She had survived so much already, and she would face this new world with courage, one small step at a time. Daniel noticed her hesitance but didn't comment. He had seen enough in his life to know that judgment came quickly and unfairly. Instead, he simply handed her a pair of gloves and a small broom. "Start with the kitchen," he said quietly. "There's a lot to do today." His tone was calm, practical, without the slightest hint of ridicule. Clara nodded, accepting the task, grateful for his patience. The kitchen was nothing like she expected. There was no stove like the one she had grown up with, only a large hearth with pots and pans hanging nearby. She had to learn how to start a fire, manage it safely, and cook meals over the open flames. It was difficult at first. The smoke made her eyes water, and she burned the first few pieces of bread she tried to bake. But she did not give up. She tried again, adjusting the fire, testing the temperature, and carefully watching the dough. After several attempts, she finally produced a loaf that was golden brown and smelled of warmth and home. While Clara worked in the kitchen, Daniel tended to the animals. He showed her how to feed the chickens, check the cows for illness, and even mend broken fences. At first, Clara struggled with the physical labor. She was not accustomed to lifting heavy buckets or handling animals that were much larger than herself. Her arms ached, and her hands became blistered, but each time she faltered, Daniel offered gentle guidance. "Try it this way," he would say, showing her the right technique. His patience was steady, unassuming, and it gave Clara the confidence to keep trying. By the end of the first week, Clara was learning quickly. She discovered that she had a knack for organizing. The pantry, once cluttered and chaotic, became neat and orderly under her care. She kept track of supplies, made lists of what needed replenishing, and even started keeping a small ledger of expenses, a skill she had learned from her father. Daniel noticed the difference immediately. The ranch, which had once felt unruly and difficult to manage alone, was beginning to feel like a home that could sustain them both. Despite these small victories, Clara could not ignore the loneliness. She missed the companionship of family and friends. The vast plains, while beautiful, often felt empty and silent. At night, she would sit by the window, listening to the wind as it swept across the prairie, and wonder if she would ever truly belong here. Would Daniel ever see her as more than a woman sent by strangers? Could trust grow between them, or would the shadow of her past always linger, keeping them apart? Daniel, too, felt the weight of these early days. He had been cautious when Clara arrived, unsure if she could adapt to ranch life or if she would resent him for the forced marriage. But he began to notice qualities in her that the letters from the East had failed to mention. Clara was intelligent, observant, and surprisingly strong. She did not complain about the hard work. She did not give up when tasks seemed impossible. And slowly, Daniel began to feel something he had not allowed himself to hope for: admiration and perhaps a growing affection. One afternoon, a sudden summer storm swept across the plains. Dark clouds rolled in, and heavy rain began to fall, turning the dirt paths into thick mud. Daniel was out repairing a broken fence at the far end of the pasture when the wind picked up, threatening to topple the posts he was trying to secure. Clara, who had been helping with chores near the house, noticed his struggle and without thinking, grabbed a saddle and rode out to find him. Her hands were slippery from the rain, and the horse stumbled once or twice, but she pressed on, determined to help. When she finally reached him, Daniel was soaked and frustrated, struggling to hold the fence post steady against the wind. Clara jumped down from her horse and began assisting him. "Here, hold this," she shouted over the noise of the storm. Together, they managed to secure the fence. Daniel looked at her in surprise and relief. He had not expected her to act so boldly, to come into the storm without hesitation. In that moment, he realized that she was not fragile, not weak, and certainly not the burden her relatives had claimed she was. From that day on, their relationship began to shift. There was an unspoken respect between them, a recognition of each other's strengths. Daniel began to confide in her, sharing small stories of life on the ranch, the hardships he had faced, and the responsibilities he carried. Clara listened, never interrupting, always attentive. In turn, she shared her own past, not in bitterness but with honesty. She spoke of the loss of her parents, the harsh judgments of her relatives, and the rumors that had followed her from town to town. Daniel listened carefully, never judging, always understanding. As the weeks passed, Clara became more confident in her new life. She learned to ride the horses with skill, to manage the daily chores without constant guidance, and to anticipate the needs of the ranch. She even began helping neighbors with small tasks, offering her knowledge and skill to those who were struggling. The same woman who had been labeled unsuitable and difficult was now becoming valued not just by Daniel but by the entire community. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel and Clara sat on the porch together. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the cool evening breeze carried the scent of hay and fresh earth. They watched as the cattle settled in for the night, and Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known since leaving home. The ranch, with its endless skies and open fields, was beginning to feel like a place she could belong. Daniel turned to her quietly. "You've done more in these few weeks than I ever expected," he said. "The ranch is better because of you." Clara smiled softly, a mixture of pride and relief. She had worked hard, learned quickly, and found her place in a world that had seemed overwhelming at first. But more than that, she had discovered something she had not expected, that she could be appreciated, valued, and even admired for who she truly was. Yet, despite these growing bonds, challenges remained. Life on a ranch was never easy. There were injuries to tend to, animals to care for, and the unpredictable forces of nature to navigate. Clara knew that her strength would be tested again and again, but she also knew that she was not alone. Daniel had begun to trust her judgment, to rely on her skills, and to appreciate her presence in ways he had never expected. Together, they were learning to face the hardships of ranch life, building something stronger than either could have done alone. Through all these experiences, Clara began to understand an important truth. Being sent away as punishment had not ended her story. It had opened a new chapter, one filled with hard work, unexpected friendships, and the possibility of love. She realized that her value was not determined by the judgments of others, but by the courage, resilience, and kindness she brought to the world. By the end of the month, the ranch had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. The house was cleaner, the barn was better organized, and the fields were well maintained. The animals were healthier and happier, responding to the care and attention that Clara and Daniel provided together. The ranch, which had once seemed overwhelming and unmanageable, was becoming a place of order and life, thanks to the partnership that was quietly forming between them. At night, Clara would often lie awake, reflecting on the day's accomplishments and challenges. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the uncertainty and fear she had felt, and the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar behind. She understood now that life could be unfair, but it could also be full of surprises. Sometimes, the most difficult paths led to the most meaningful destinations. And Daniel, watching her quietly from the doorway or working alongside her in the fields, began to realize something important too. The woman who had arrived as a stranger, sent by others as punishment, was not only capable but extraordinary. She was patient, intelligent, and brave. She had a quiet strength that complemented his own, and her presence was changing the ranch and his life in ways he had never imagined. Together, they faced each day with determination, learning, growing and slowly discovering that the partnership forced upon them by circumstance might just become something far more meaningful than either of them had dared to hope. The woman who had been sent away as an unwanted bride was beginning to show that she could be much more than anyone had imagined: a partner, a friend, and perhaps even a heart that would one day belong entirely to him. The days on the ranch had begun to settle into a rhythm, though life was never truly quiet or easy. Clara had grown more confident in her routines, handling chores, caring for animals, and managing the small house with skill and patience. Yet she still carried with her a quiet shadow from the past, the whispers, the judgment, and the sense of being unwanted that had followed her across the country. Even as the sun rose over the golden plains, she sometimes felt the weight of her history pressing on her, reminding her that no matter how hard she worked, there were people who would never see her for who she truly was. One morning after the early chores were done, Clara sat outside on the porch, polishing the wooden railing with a cloth. The air was crisp and bright, and the sounds of the ranch filled the space around her, the lowing of cows, the clucking of chickens, and the soft rustle of the wind through the tall grass. Daniel approached slowly, holding a bucket of feed for the animals. He paused when he noticed her thoughtful expression. "You've been quiet this morning," he said gently. "Everything all right?" Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a hesitation, a mixture of fear and trust. For the first time, she felt like she could speak openly about what had been on her mind. "Daniel," she began softly, "there's something I think you should know about me, about my past." Daniel set the bucket down and sat beside her, giving her his full attention. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said kindly, "but if you do, I'll listen." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Back in my hometown," she said, "there were rumors about me. People said things that weren't true. My relatives, instead of helping me, they decided to send me away. They called me difficult, unsuitable, unwanted. That's why I'm here." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not cry. She had endured too much already to let the tears come so easily. Daniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. He could see the weight she had carried for years in the way she held herself, the careful way she spoke, the hesitation in her movements. "Clara," he said finally, "those people were wrong about you. I see who you are, not what they said." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was as though a heavy stone she had been carrying for years had been lifted, even if only slightly. "I've always wondered," she admitted, "if anyone could ever see me for who I truly am. I've been judged my whole life, and I just wanted someone to understand me." Daniel reached out and gently took her hand. "I understand," he said simply. "I don't care about the past. What matters is here and now and what we do with it." From that moment, something shifted between them. The walls of caution and hesitation began to crumble, replaced by trust and mutual respect. Clara no longer felt like a stranger in this world, and Daniel began to see her not just as a helper or companion, but as someone he could rely on, someone whose presence brought warmth and light to his life. In the days that followed, Clara's influence on the ranch became more noticeable. She began taking small initiatives, improving routines, and finding ways to make life easier for both of them. She organized the pantry, kept careful records of supplies, and even started planning meals with a balance of nutrition and simplicity that suited life on the plains. The ranch, which had once felt chaotic and overwhelming, was beginning to run more smoothly under her guidance. But Clara's impact was not limited to the ranch. She had a way of seeing people that others often missed, a kindness and attention to detail that made those around her feel valued. One afternoon, a neighbor came by with a young boy who was struggling to read. Clara offered to help him, sitting with him in the small house and patiently teaching him letters and words. Within weeks, the boy had improved remarkably, and the neighbors began to notice the quiet strength and wisdom of the woman they had once thought was unwanted. Daniel watched these moments with a growing sense of admiration. He had been cautious at first, unsure of how to feel about Clara, but now he began to recognize the extraordinary qualities she possessed. She was not only capable and intelligent, but she had a warmth and generosity that drew people in. The ranch, the town, and his own heart were slowly being transformed by her presence. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch together, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The day had been long, filled with work and small triumphs, and yet there was a sense of peace in the air. Clara looked out over the fields, her mind wandering to the future. She realized that she had come a long way from the frightened, lonely girl who had stepped off the train weeks ago. She had faced challenges, learned new skills, and begun to find her place in this vast, open land. Daniel broke the silence. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "The ranch, the house, even the people around here, they're all better because of you." Clara smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I never expected to find a place where I belonged," she admitted, "but I think maybe I've finally found one." Their growing bond did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. Word spread of the woman who had been sent as a mail-order bride and yet had become a pillar of the community. People began to treat her with respect, seeking her advice, her help, and her guidance. The same girl who had been called unsuitable and difficult was now valued and appreciated in ways that she had never imagined. Despite the positive changes, life on the ranch remained challenging. There were still long hours, heavy work, and unexpected setbacks. Animals became sick, fences broke, and storms threatened the crops. But Clara faced each obstacle with determination and patience, learning from Daniel and gradually developing the skills to handle emergencies on her own. Each challenge she overcame strengthened her confidence and reinforced the sense that she truly belonged in this world. One afternoon, a particularly harsh storm swept across the plains, bringing wind and rain that threatened to wash out the fences and flood the low fields. Daniel was out in the rain, trying to secure the livestock when Clara, without hesitation, joined him. She worked tirelessly alongside him, her hands wet and blistered, her clothes soaked through, but her determination unwavering. Together, they managed to protect the animals and secure the property. When the storm passed, Daniel looked at Clara with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He realized that her courage was not only admirable but rare. She had faced a life that had treated her unfairly, traveled miles into the unknown, and yet she remained strong, resilient, and kind. She had turned what others saw as punishment into a remarkable strength. It was during moments like these that Daniel began to see Clara not just as a companion, but as something much more, a partner in every sense of the word. Her intelligence, courage, and unwavering spirit were qualities he had long admired, but never expected to find in someone sent as a punishment. She was, in his eyes, a treasure, a rare and precious gift that had come into his life when he least expected it. Clara, too, began to see Daniel in a new light. She realized that beneath his rugged exterior was a man of great patience, kindness, and understanding. He had trusted her when others had doubted her, allowed her to prove herself, and supported her growth in ways she had never experienced before. The bond between them deepened with each passing day, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. As the weeks turned into months, Clara and Daniel continued to grow both individually and together. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts, and the small community around them began to see the remarkable change in both the land and the people who lived there. Clara's influence reached beyond the boundaries of the ranch, touching lives in quiet, meaningful ways. She taught children to read, helped neighbors with difficult tasks, and offered counsel to those who needed it. Her presence became a source of inspiration and hope. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Clara and Daniel sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Clara felt a sense of peace and contentment she had never known before. The long journey, the hardships, and the uncertainty of her past had led her to this moment, a life where she was valued, respected, and appreciated. Daniel turned to her quietly. "Clara," he said softly, "you've changed my world, not just the ranch, but my life." "I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara's eyes filled with warmth. "And you've changed mine," she replied. "You've given me a chance to be seen for who I am, not who others say I should be. I've never felt so understood." In that quiet, shared moment, both of them realized something profound. The hardships that had brought them together were not mistakes, but stepping stones. The woman who had been sent as a punishment had not only survived, but thrived. She had turned rejection into opportunity, judgment into respect, and fear into courage. And in doing so, she had become indispensable, not just to Daniel, but to everyone whose life she touched. The ranch, once a place of isolation and hard labor, had become a home filled with hope, growth, and connection. And in the hearts of Clara and Daniel, A deep and unspoken understanding began to blossom, a recognition that they were no longer two strangers brought together by circumstance, but partners bound by trust, respect, and the quiet promise of a shared future. The seasons changed slowly on the ranch, each bringing its own challenges and beauty. Summer gave way to the crisp air of fall, the golden grass turning amber under the warm sun. Clara had grown into her role on the ranch, her confidence now shining in every task she undertook. Daniel noticed it every day, the way she moved, the way she thought ahead, and the way she handled both animals and people with patience and grace. She had become the heart of the ranch, the strength that balanced his own rugged determination. One morning, as Clara tended the chickens, Daniel walked up with a letter in his hand. His brow was thoughtful as he read it aloud. "It's from your relatives," he said quietly, handing it to her. Clara hesitated. She had tried to forget the people who had sent her away, the ones who had never understood her. But curiosity and perhaps a desire for closure made her take the letter. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter was polite, distant, and full of apologies. They wanted to know how she was faring, how she had adjusted, and if she was happy. Their words carried the same judgmental tone she had grown up with, as if her worth needed their approval. Clara read it carefully, absorbing the words, but she felt no anger or bitterness. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. Daniel watched her, seeing the mixture of emotions on her face. "You don't have to answer them," he said softly. "They had their chance to understand you. They didn't. That doesn't change the person you are now." Clara smiled faintly, folding the letter and placing it gently on the table. "You're right," she said. "Their opinion doesn't matter anymore. I've found my place here. I've found people who value me and someone who sees me for who I truly am." Her eyes met Daniel's, and he saw the honesty, strength, and warmth in them. The days continued, filled with work, learning, and shared moments. Clara had become essential not only to the ranch but to the nearby town. She taught local children to read and write, helped neighbors with small tasks, and offered guidance with patience and kindness. Her reputation, once tarnished by false rumors, had transformed. The same woman labeled unsuitable was now respected and admired by everyone around her. Daniel often marveled at her. He remembered the first day she had stepped off the train, carrying a small suitcase and a heart full of fear. He had wondered if she could survive the challenges of the ranch, if she could adapt to this new life. Now he realized how wrong he would have been to doubt her. Clara had not only survived, she had thrived. She had transformed the ranch, touched the lives of those around her, and become indispensable to him in ways he could never have imagined. One evening, after a long day of chores, Daniel suggested they take a walk along the edge of the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of pink, orange, and gold. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of the earth, hay, and wildflowers. Clara walked beside him, her hand brushing against his, feeling the quiet strength in his presence. "Daniel," she said softly, "I never imagined my life would lead me here. At first I thought I was being punished, sent away because no one wanted me. But now I see that everything led to this moment. Everything I endured prepared me for this life, for this place, and for you." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. The fading sunlight lit her face, highlighting the resilience and grace that had always been there. "Clara," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "I don't see punishment. I see courage. I see strength. And I see someone who has brought more life, warmth, and hope to this ranch than anyone else ever could. You are my dream treasure, not because you were sent here, but because you are exactly who you are." Clara felt her heart swell. For the first time in her life, she truly believed that someone saw her fully, without judgment, without doubt, without hesitation. Daniel's words were not just praise. They were recognition, validation, and a promise of acceptance. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, feeling the steady warmth and reassurance it offered. As the months passed, their bond deepened. They worked side by side, facing the endless demands of ranch life, celebrating small victories and supporting each other through difficulties. Clara's influence grew not only within the ranch, but throughout the town. People came to value her advice, her patience, and her willingness to help in any situation. She became a symbol of resilience, kindness, and quiet strength. One particularly harsh winter tested both of them. Snow fell heavily for days, blanketing the ranch in white and making work even more difficult. The horses needed extra care, fences required reinforcement, and the livestock had to be protected from the cold. Clara rose early each day, her determination unwavering. She worked alongside Daniel, carrying heavy feed, tending to the animals, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly despite the snow and ice. Through it all, Daniel watched her with admiration. He knew that many people would have complained, given up, or retreated in fear. Clara, however, met each challenge head-on. Her resilience was inspiring, her courage unwavering, and her heart full of compassion. She was no longer the woman sent as a punishment. She was a partner, a leader, and the heart of his life. As spring returned, bringing warmth and renewal, Daniel and Clara began to imagine a future together beyond the immediate demands of the ranch. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and the life they wanted to build. It was a life rooted in partnership, respect, and love, a life that neither had expected but both cherished. One afternoon, after finishing the day's work, Daniel suggested they sit by the edge of the fields and watch the sunset. The sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, and the wind carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Daniel took Clara's hand in his, holding it gently but firmly. "Clara," he said, "you have changed everything. You've changed my world, this ranch, and everyone around us. But most importantly, you've changed me. You've shown me what it means to trust, to care, and to love without fear. I don't want to imagine a life without you by my side." Clara looked into his eyes, feeling the depth of his sincerity and the warmth of his heart. "Daniel," she said softly, "I've never felt so seen, so valued, and so at home. You've given me a life I never thought I could have, and a love I never dared to imagine." The moment felt timeless. The world around them faded, leaving only the vast plains, the fading light, and the bond they had built together. Daniel knelt on one knee, holding her hand and gazing up at her with a mixture of hope and certainty. "Clara Whitmore," he said, "will you share this life with me? Will you be my partner, my friend, and my love for all the days to come?" Tears filled Clara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, relief, and deep love. She nodded, unable to speak at first, her heart full. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, Daniel, yes, I will." The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude and hard work, now felt alive with celebration, even in that quiet moment. The animals moved contentedly in the fields, the wind carried a gentle promise of new beginnings, and the sky above seemed endless and full of possibilities. Clara had arrived at a life she had never imagined, a life built on courage, resilience, and love. Over the following months, their life together settled into a comforting rhythm. They worked side by side, shared meals at the table they had repaired together, and spent evenings talking about dreams, plans, and hopes for the future. The ranch thrived, the animals flourished, and the small town grew to see Clara not as a stranger or punishment, but as a remarkable woman who had brought strength, kindness, and wisdom to everyone around her. Clara never forgot the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, and the sense of being unwanted. But she also remembered the courage that had carried her through, the determination that had helped her adapt, and the kindness she had discovered in Daniel. Each challenge she had faced had shaped her, preparing her for the life she now lived, a life full of purpose, love, and fulfillment. And Daniel, too, never forgot the moment she had stepped off the train, uncertain and wary. He knew that she had been sent as punishment, judged unfairly by people who could not see her worth. But he had seen her clearly from the start, recognized her courage, and grown to love her for exactly who she was. Clara was no longer unwanted. She was his partner, his heart, and his dream come true. In the end, the woman who had been sent away as a so-called punishment became something far greater than anyone could have imagined. She was not just a helper, not just a bride. She was a force of resilience, a source of love and warmth, and the treasure that Daniel had always needed, even if he had not known it. The hardships that once threatened to break her had instead forged a life of joy, purpose, and connection. Clara Whitmore had arrived at the ranch as an unwanted bride, sent away by people who failed to see her worth. But she had turned that rejection into a life of meaning and love. She had found a home, a community, and a man who cherished her not for what others thought of her, but for the courage, strength, and heart she carried within her. She was no longer a burden, no longer defined by rumor or judgment. She was a treasure, a dream realized in the wide open plains of Texas, under skies that stretched farther than she had ever imagined, alongside a man who saw her truly and loved her deeply. And in that simple, quiet truth, Clara and Daniel found the greatest gift life could offer: love, acceptance, and a life built together against all odds.